The day Sadie Brooks turned 30 years old, she sat on the back steps of the Dusty Creek saloon where she worked, held a cracked hand mirror up to the dying afternoon light, and told herself that every line on her face was proof of a life she had failed to live properly. The sun was bleeding orange and red across the Nevada sky in the autumn of 1882, and Dusty Creek was the kind of town that swallowed people whole and forgot to spit them out. It had one main street of packed dirt that turned to mud when it rained and cracked into fissures when it dried. It had a blacksmith, a general store, a church nobody used on Sundays except for weddings and funerals, a sheriff's office that sat perpetually empty because the sheriff, old Earl Dougal, was perpetually asleep inside it, and the saloon, which was called the Red Lantern and which Sadie had worked in for 4 years cleaning glasses, serving whiskey, and keeping her eyes fixed safely on the middle distance so no one would try to start a conversation she did not want to finish. She set the mirror face down on the wooden step beside her and pressed the back of her hand to her cheek. 30 years old. She had come west from Missouri at the age of 22 believing, with the particular stubbornness of someone who has nothing left to lose, that the frontier would offer her something worth having. Her mother was dead by then. Her father had remarried quickly, the way men did, and the woman he married had no interest in a stepdaughter who asked too many questions and laughed too loudly at things that were not meant to be funny. So Sadie had packed one bag, taken the money she had saved from 3 years of taking in laundry, and followed a wagon train west until it deposited her in Nevada like something left behind by accident. She had tried. She wanted it remembered, even if only by herself, that she had genuinely tried. She had worked at the general store for 1.5 years until it burned down in a fire that had nothing to do with her but felt personal anyway. She had taken up sewing for a time, but her hands were steadier with a tray than with a needle. She had briefly, disastrously, attempted to claim a small parcel of land east of town under the Homestead Act, but the soil was bad. The well she dug ran dry before it hit anything useful, and a man named Garland Holt, who owned 3 times more land than he needed, had made it clear through a series of increasingly unfriendly visits that he considered her acreage part of his natural territory. She had let it go. She always let things go. And so she was here, on the back steps of the Red Lantern Saloon, 30 years old, with $23 saved in a tin box beneath her cot in the narrow room above the bar, a dress that had been mended in 4 places, and the quiet, certain feeling that the world had been moving forward without her for some time. She heard boots on the alley behind her before she saw anything, and she did not look up, because she had learned that looking up was an invitation, and she was not in the mood to extend one. "Miss," the voice was careful, not loud, not demanding. It had the quality of someone who knew when to speak quietly and had thought about it first. She looked up. He was standing at the edge of the alley where it met the side street, and the late light caught him at a sideways angle that made him look slightly unreal, like a figure in a painting someone had started and not finished. He was tall, with the kind of lean build that came from actual work rather than intention, and he was holding the reins of a bay horse in one hand and a folded piece of paper in the other. His hat was brown and badly in need of a new brim on the left side. His boots were good, though, the kind of worn-in good that meant they had been bought with care and used with purpose. He had dark hair that curled slightly at the collar, and his face was the face of someone who had been outdoors long enough that the sun had written its opinion permanently into his skin. He was looking at her with an expression she could not immediately categorize. Not pity, not the particular casual attention men at the bar gave her when she brought them their drinks, something more careful than that. "I am sorry to interrupt," he said. "I am looking for the sheriff's office." "Across the main street," Sadie said, "though I will warn you he is likely asleep." "I was told that too," the man said. He folded the piece of paper and put it in his shirt pocket. "Thank you." He did not leave immediately. He stood there for a moment longer, and Sadie, who had spent 4 years perfecting the art of making men feel dismissed without saying anything rude, found that she did not particularly deploy that skill. She just looked at him and he looked at her, and the horse behind him shifted its weight and blew a long breath through its nose. "Are you all right?" he asked. "I am fine," she said. "You looked like someone who was thinking something very heavy." She almost laughed, and the almost was surprising enough that she felt it in her chest. That is a strange thing to say to a stranger. "I suppose it is." He touched the brim of his hat. "I am Jasper Wells. I am passing through trying to find someone." "Sadie Brooks," she said, because it seemed only fair. "I am not passing through, I am here." Something shifted in his expression at that, quick and then smoothed over, but she had caught it. He nodded once. "Sadie Brooks," he repeated as though he was filing it somewhere. "Good evening, Miss Brooks." "Good evening, Mr. Wells." He led his horse around the corner and was gone, and Sadie sat there for another few minutes with her hands in her lap, not thinking about anything in particular, which was unusual, because she was almost always thinking about something. She went inside when the chill came off the desert and did not think about Jasper Wells again until she saw him at the bar 2 hours later. He was sitting at the far end, away from the card game that was getting too loud near the window, and he had a glass of water in front of him, not whiskey, which was unusual enough in the red lantern that she noticed it. He was reading something, a small book, tucked against the edge of the bar so it was out of the way, and he was not bothering anyone. Sadie carried the tray of empty glasses back behind the bar and started washing them. Cora Lee, who owned the saloon and had the general disposition of a woman who had survived everything that had been thrown at her and had developed opinions about all of it, appeared at Sadie's elbow. "Who is he?" Cora Lee murmured, nodding toward the far end of the bar. "Said his name is Jasper Wells, said he is passing through." "What is he reading?" "I did not ask." Cora Lee gave her a look that communicated several things without the use of words. She was good at that. "Go find out." "He has been sitting there an hour, and he has only had the one water. Either he is a cheap customer or he is waiting for something, and either way I would like to know which." Sadie dried her hands and walked the length of the bar to where he was sitting. He looked up before she was halfway there, which meant he had been aware of the room even while he was reading, which she noted. "Can I get you something else?" she asked. "We have coffee if you do not want whiskey." "Coffee would be good," he said. He closed the book and set it down. She caught the title. It was a collection of geological surveys of the Nevada Territory. "You are reading government land surveys for pleasure," she said before she had decided to say it. He looked surprised and then pleased. "It is useful," he said. "I am looking for someone who was last reported in the mining camps east of here. The survey maps show the water sources. People do not go far from water. Who are you looking for?" He was quiet for a moment, deciding something. "My brother," he said. "He came out here 2 years ago and stopped writing letters. I want to know if he is alive." Sadie poured his coffee and set it in front of him. "What is his name?" "Daniel Wells. He would be 26 now. About my height, lighter hair." She shook her head slowly. "I do not know everyone who passes through, but that name does not ring a bell. You could ask at the general store. Mrs. Pettigrew knows everyone who has ever bought a single thing in this town." "Thank you," he said. He wrapped both hands around the coffee cup. His hands were calloused, she noticed, across the palms and the inside of the fingers, the way someone's hands got from roping or from working with tools consistently over a long period of time. "Where are you from?" she asked, and immediately wondered why she had asked. "Wyoming originally," he said. "Ranching. I have been working my way across the territory for the past 3 months following whatever news I could find about Daniel." He looked at the cup. "My mother worries." There was something in the way he said it. Not self-pitying, not performing nobility. Just a plain fact that he was doing this because someone loved his brother and had asked him to, and that was enough of a reason. "That is a good thing," Sadie said, "to have someone who worries." He looked up at her then, and for a moment the bar noise receded to a kind of background hum, and she felt him look at her the way very few people ever bothered to, not at what she was wearing or at what she was carrying or at what she might be useful for, but actually at her. "Yes," he said quietly, "it is." She went back to work. He stayed until closing, reading his survey books and drinking 3 cups of coffee, and when Coralie was locking the front door, he tipped his hat to both of them and said good night in a way that was so straightforward, it almost seemed foreign in the context of the Red Lantern, where every pleasantry generally came with something attached to it. "That man," Coralie said, turning the key, "is either very good or very boring." "I think he is very good," Sadie said, without thinking about it. Coralie gave her that look again and said nothing. The next morning Sadie was at the general store before it properly opened, because Mrs. Pettigrew liked her and let her come early to buy her bread before the cowboys came in and cleared the shelves. Mrs. Pettigrew was a small woman of about 60 with silver hair and the organized efficiency of someone who had been running a frontier general store for 20 years and had strong opinions about the right way to do everything. "Sadie Brooks," Mrs. Pettigrew said, not looking up from the crates she was sorting, "you look like you slept and woke up thinking about something." "I slept fine," Sadie said. "Mrs. Pettigrew, do you know a man named Daniel Wells? Young, maybe 26 now, lighter hair. Would have come through perhaps 2 years ago." Mrs. Pettigrew was quiet for longer than a quick no would have taken. She set down the jar she was holding and turned. "Why do you ask?" "His brother is in town looking for him." Something moved across Mrs. Pettigrew's face, something that was not comfortable. "His brother," she said. "Yes, Jasper Wells. He is a rancher from Wyoming." "Daniel Wells," Mrs. Pettigrew said slowly. "He came through here, summer of 1880. He was heading for the Caldwell mines east of the ridge." She paused. "Sadie, there was a collapse at the Caldwell mine. November of 1880. 6 men died. I do not know for certain, but Daniel Wells was one of the names listed at the assay office after." Sadie stood very still. "Are you certain?" "Not entirely, but the name was there." She wiped her hands on her apron. "If his brother is looking, he should go to the assay office. Ask for the record book from November 1880. Whatever is there." Sadie bought her bread and walked back down the main street slowly. The morning was cold and bright, the way Nevada mornings were in late October, and her breath made small clouds in the air in front of her. She did not want to be the one to tell him. She also thought that he deserved to know rather than spend more weeks following trails that ended 2 years ago. She found Jasper Wells at the livery stable, brushing down his bay horse with the focused attention of someone who considered the animal's well-being a genuine priority and not an afterthought. The horse, she noticed, had been well cared for through what must have been a long and difficult journey. "Mr. Wells," she said. He turned, and his face did the thing she had noticed the night before, where he actually looked at her instead of around her. "Miss Brooks, good morning. I asked about your brother," she said. "At the general store." He went very still. He set down the brush. His hands were steady, but there was something in his chest that changed. She could see it in the way he breathed. "Me?" he said. She told him. She did not soften it too much because she thought he was a man who preferred honesty to comfort and would not forgive her later for having wrapped a hard truth in too much cotton. She told him about the Caldwell mine, about the collapse, about the records at the assay office. She watched his face go through several things in quick succession and arrive at something quiet and controlled. "I need to go to the assay office," he said. "I know. I can take you there." He looked at her. "You do not need to." "I know that too," she said. They walked together to the assay office, which was at the far end of the main street beside the telegraph station. The man behind the counter was named Percy, and he had the somewhat defensive demeanor of someone who spent most of his time around people who were hoping for good news about ore samples and were usually disappointed. He found the record book without being asked twice, and Jasper stood at the counter and read the November 1880 entry with the kind of stillness that was not the absence of feeling but its compression. Daniel Elias Wells, age 24, Caldwell Mine, shaft number 3. Killed in the collapse of November 14, 1880. Body recovered and interred at the mining camp cemetery. Jasper closed the book. He stood there for a moment longer. He pressed one hand flat against the counter. "There is a grave," Sadie said gently. "That is something. You can write to your mother with that." He nodded. He breathed. He turned and walked back out into the morning light, and Sadie followed him and stood beside him on the wooden sidewalk and did not say anything because there was nothing useful to say and she had enough sense to know it. After a while he said, he was 24 years old. Yes. He wanted to find gold and come home rich and buy my mother a proper house with glass windows. He said it flatly, not bitterly, just exactly the way it was. He was always wanting to do something large. That sounds like a good kind of person to be, Sadie said. Jasper looked at her. His eyes were dark, darker in the morning light, and there was grief in them, but also something else, something that was paying attention to the world even now, even in this moment. Thank you, he said, for finding this out. I would have looked for weeks more. You should not have had to find it out alone, she said. He looked at her for a long moment. No, he agreed. I suppose not. He spent the day in town. She saw him at the telegraph station in the early afternoon, sending word to Wyoming, and she imagined the words he was choosing, the way he would be careful about how he said it so that his mother's world changed as gently as it could. In the evening he came back to the Red Lantern and ate the plate of beans and cornbread that Cora Lee sold alongside the drinks, and he sat at the far end of the bar again, but this time he was not reading. He was just sitting, looking at the middle distance, and Sadie understood that look very well. She brought him a second cup of coffee without being asked. You do not have to tend to me, he said. I am not tending to you, she said. I am doing my job. The coffee is the same either way. He looked at the cup and then at her. How long have you been here in Dusty Creek? 4 years. And before that, Missouri. And before that, still Missouri. Why did you come west? She leaned against the bar because Cora Lee had gone to the back room and the card game near the window was too loud for anyone to hear their conversation. I came west because I believed the frontier would offer a person something fresh, she said. A start that did not carry the weight of everything that came before it. Did it? It carried different weight, she said, which is not the same as lighter. He was quiet for a moment. What did you want when you came out here? She looked at him carefully, because men did not usually ask her that. They asked her for drinks, for directions, occasionally for information, and once memorably for her to pretend she had not seen something which she had declined. They did not generally ask her what she wanted. A piece of land, she said. A garden. Something to wake up to that was mine. She paused. I tried. I had a claim east of town for almost a year. The soil was terrible and a man named Garland Holt made it clear he wanted it, so I let it go. You should not have had to let it go. No, she said, I should not have. He looked at her steadily. What happened to the claim? Holt took it. He has about 300 acres east of town now, all of it stitched together from pieces that other people gave up on or were pushed off of. The land office turned a blind eye. She said this without particular heat, because she had been angry about it for a long time and the fire had settled into something more like a cold fact. That is how it goes. Jasper was quiet for a moment. I know a land attorney in Carson City, he said. If the claim was properly filed and the abandonment was not voluntary in any legal sense, there may be recourse. She looked at him. It was 4 years ago. Land records do not expire the same way other things do. Mr. Wells, she said, you are being kind, but you do not need to fix my problems. You have your own. I know that, he said, and he said it without defensiveness. I am not fixing anything. I am telling you what I know. He looked at the bar. You told me what you knew this morning, even though it was not easy to say. That seems to make us even. She did not have an argument for that, and so she went back to work. He was gone in the morning, or she thought he was. She got up at 6 the way she always did and went down to help Cora Lee clean the bar before it opened. And the alley beside the saloon was empty, and the livery stable had a different horse tied out front than the bay she had noticed. She felt something contract briefly in her chest and told herself it was nothing, just the habit of noticing things, which was both her greatest asset and her most persistent inconvenience. But he came back at noon. She heard the horse in the alley and looked out the window at the back of the saloon and saw him dismounting, and the brief contraction in her chest did the opposite thing, which she found annoying. He knocked at the back door, which was unusual, and Coralie looked at Sadie with an expression that was entirely too knowing, and Sadie went to open it. "I went east," Jasper said when she opened the door. He was dusty from the ride, and there was something different in his face, something more settled. "To the mining camp, to Daniel's grave," she waited. "It is a proper grave," he said. "The men who worked the camp built a fence around it and kept it up. There were 6 graves, all of them tended." He paused. "I said what I needed to say. I will write to my mother with the details so she can have it too." "I am glad," Sadie said. "I am also going to stay in Dusty Creek for a few days more," he said. "I am not ready to ride back yet. I need to think about what comes next." "We have a boarding house," she said. "Mrs. Alvarez runs it. It is clean and she cooks a real breakfast." He nodded. "And I owe you a conversation," he said. She blinked. "You do not owe me anything. I told you last night that you should not have had to give up your claim. I meant that." He met her eyes. "I would like to look at it if you are willing to show me. I would like to see what the land is." She stared at him. "Why?" "Because I am a rancher," he said, "and because I know land, and because it seems like something that should not have been taken from you without someone at least looking at it properly." It was such a practical and simultaneously strange thing to say that she stood there for a moment without answering, and Coralie appeared at her shoulder and said, "She will show you Saturday morning." And Sadie turned to look at her, and Coralie gave her a look that said, clearly and without any room for misinterpretation, "Do not argue with me about this." "Saturday morning," Sadie said. Saturday morning arrived with a sky that was clear and pale blue, and Jasper brought his bay horse, and Sadie borrowed the old gray mare that Coralie kept behind the saloon and called Biscuit for reasons she had never fully explained. They rode east out of town on the dry road and turned south at the broken cottonwood that served as a landmark, and Sadie led him to the parcel that had been hers for 11 months 4 years ago. It was 160 acres of scrubland and rocky earth, with a dry wash running through the southern edge of it that Sadie had believed, incorrectly, would hold water reliably enough for a garden. To the east, where the soil changed, the ground was more promising, with better depth and less rock, and there was a slope to the north that caught the morning sun for most of the day. Jasper dismounted and walked. He did not talk for a long time, just walked across the land with his hat pushed back slightly and his eyes moving across everything with the methodical attention of someone reading a page. He crouched and pressed his fingers into the soil. He looked at the dry wash and followed it for a quarter-mile south until it curved. He came back. "This is better land than you were told it was," he said. "The well I tried to dig ran dry. You dug in the wrong place. The water table under this section sits deep, but the wash curves back under the eastern slope. If you dug there," he pointed, "you would find water within 20 feet. She looked at where he pointed. "You can tell that just from looking. I grew up reading land," he said simply. "My father taught me." He turned back to face the whole parcel. "The soil on the eastern third is workable, not rich but workable if you amend it. You could keep a kitchen garden and some animals." He paused. "This was a reasonable claim, Sadie. Whatever Holt told you or implied or made you believe, this was reasonable land." She had not heard him use her first name before, and it landed somewhere in the middle of her chest like something finding its place. "It does not change anything now," she said. "Holt took it." "Holt filed a supplementary claim in 1880, Jasper said. "I stopped at the land office yesterday morning before I rode east. The filing is irregular. Your original claim was never formally abandoned, just unfiled after the fact. The land office clerk at the time was a man named Bickler who was known to accept consideration from Holt." He looked at her. "I told you I knew a land attorney in Carson City." She stared at him. "You went to the land office on my behalf. When did you have time to do that?" "Thursday afternoon," he said. "While you were working." "Mr. Wells," she said, and she did not know whether she was grateful or overwhelmed or something else entirely. "You can call me Jasper," he said, and he was not smiling exactly, but there was something in his expression that was warm and careful, and she was having trouble looking directly at it. "I wrote a letter to the attorney. I described the situation. He will write back within the week." She sat down on a flat rock near the dry wash and looked at the land she had given up on. The morning sun was moving across the eastern slope exactly the way Jasper had described, and the light fell over the rocky soil with something that looked, if you were willing to see it, like possibility. "I am 30 years old," she said, out loud to the air as much as to him. "I have been in this territory for 8 years. I have $23 in a tin box and a dress that has been mended in 4 places and nothing that is mine." She said it plainly, not asking for sympathy, just accounting for herself. "I came out here believing something, and I am not sure I believe it anymore." Jasper sat down on the rock a few feet from her. He was quiet for a moment. "I disagree," he said. She looked at him. "With what?" "With the notion that you have nothing to show for it." He looked at the land and then at her. "Do you want me to list what I have noticed in the past 4 days?" She felt something strange happen in her face, something that was almost amused and almost something more than that. "You have known me for 4 days," she said. "I know," he said. "But you are the kind of person who is visible when you are not trying to be, so 4 days has given me more than it might with someone else." He was completely serious, and it was the complete seriousness of it that undid the defensive thing she usually kept ready. "You found out painful information about a stranger, and you chose to deliver it in person rather than let him find it alone. That is a character. That is not nothing." She was quiet. "You have worked in a saloon for 4 years," he continued, and he said it without condescension, just as a fact he was examining. "And from what I have seen in 4 evenings, every person in that room trusts you. The old man with the bad leg always tilts his glass toward you when he wants another without saying a word, because he knows you will see it. The 2 cowboys from the Jensen Ranch who come in Thursday nights, you remembered that one of them does not take ice because of his teeth, without being told again. Cora Lee trusts you with the keys to the bar, which I noticed she does not do with the other girl who works there." Sadie was looking at him now fully, and something had gone very still inside her. "You tried to homestead land that a powerful man wanted, and you stayed in this town even after you let it go," he said. "You did not run. You did not stop trying to build something. You adapted." He paused. "You asked for your bread before the store opened, which tells me you plan ahead. You know the name of every horse in the livery stable, which tells me you pay attention to things that other people overlook. And you sat on those back steps on your birthday in the worst light imaginable, and held up a mirror to look at yourself honestly, which is something most people are not brave enough to do." She realized her hands were pressed flat against her knees, and she made herself relax them. "You knew it was my birthday," she said. "Cora Lee mentioned it," he said. "She seemed worried about you." Sadie looked at the dry wash. The water that was not there, the soil that was better than she had believed, the slope that caught the morning sun. "You cannot know all of that about a person in 4 days," she said. "You would be surprised what you can know about a person," he said, "if you bother to look." She turned and looked at him directly, and she found that he was already looking at her, and there was nothing complicated in his expression, nothing hidden or angled. He was just looking at her the way she had been noticed on those back steps, fully and without apology. "Why does it matter to you?" she asked, not sharply, genuinely. He was quiet for a moment. "Because you deserve to have someone tell you the truth," he said, "which is that you are not a woman who has nothing to show for 8 years. You are a woman who has been quietly extraordinary in a place that was not paying attention." He paused. "And because when I told you about Daniel, you stood there in the alley and you did not say it was fine, or that everything happened for a reason, or any of the things people say when they are trying to make grief go away faster. You just stood there with me. That is a rare thing." She was going to say something measured and sensible, but what came out instead was, "I did not know what to say." "You did not need to say anything," he said. "That was the whole point." They sat there in the morning light on the flat rock by the dry wash, and the land stretched out around them in the good plain silence of the desert, and Sadie felt something shift in her that she had not expected to feel, something that was not dramatic or sudden but was very certain, the way you feel when something that has been slightly misaligned for a long time settles into its right position. She did not say anything about it. Not then. She was 30 years old and she had lived alone in her thoughts for long enough that she knew the difference between a feeling and a decision, and this was still a feeling. They rode back to town in the early afternoon, and Jasper went to Mrs. Alvarez's boarding house and Sadie went to the Red Lantern, and the day proceeded in its ordinary way except that it felt different, which was something she noticed and filed away carefully. The attorney's letter arrived in 6 days. It was addressed to Jasper Wells, care of Mrs. Alvarez's boarding house, and Jasper brought it to the saloon on a Tuesday evening and set it on the bar in front of Sadie without opening it first. "It is your land," he said. "You should read it first." She looked at the envelope. It was from R.H. Calloway, attorney at law, Carson City, Nevada. She opened it carefully, pulling the single folded sheet out and smoothing it on the bar. The letter said, in the careful, measured language of lawyers, that the original homestead claim filed by one Sadie Elizabeth Brooks in April of 1878 had never been legally abandoned, that the supplementary filing by one Garland T. Holt in September of 1880 had been processed by a land office clerk named Thomas Bickler, who had since been removed from his position for reasons related to impropriety, that the filing was therefore irregular and challengeable, and that if Miss Brooks wished to pursue reinstatement of her claim, Mr. Calloway believed the probability of success was favorable, particularly given that Holt had not yet made significant improvements to that specific parcel. She read it twice. Then she set it down and looked at Jasper. "This is real," she said. "Yes," he said, "this could actually work. Calloway is good," he said. "He won a similar case in Ely 2 years ago." She sat down on the bar stool because her legs felt slightly less certain than they had a moment ago. "This was my land," she said. "It was always my land." "Yes," he said quietly. "It was." She looked at him. He was leaning on the bar across from her with his forearms resting on the wood and his hat beside him, and she realized that in the 10 days she had known him the picture she had of him had gotten clearer and clearer, not simplified, clearer, the way something comes into focus gradually rather than all at once. "Jasper," she said. "Yes." "Why are you still here? You found Daniel. You have done what you came to do." She said it gently, not as an accusation. "You do not have a ranch to get back to." He was quiet for a moment. "My ranch in Wyoming is being managed by Pete Garvey, who has worked it with me for 5 years and who is more reliable than I am," he said. "I can stay where I need to stay." "And you need to stay here," she said. He looked at her steadily. "I find I do not particularly want to leave," he said. She held his gaze. "Because of the land claim." "No," he said, and the simplicity of it landed in the room between them like something clean and true, and she felt herself reach toward it without meaning to. She did not say anything, and he did not press anything, and Cora Lee appeared at the other end of the bar with the deliberate busyness of someone who was absolutely listening and was trying to appear absolutely not to be. Sadie wrote to R.H. Calloway that week. She asked for representation and asked about costs, and Calloway wrote back within 10 days to say that he worked on contingency in land reinstatement cases and would take a percentage of the first year's assessed value if successful, which meant she did not need to find money she did not have. In the meantime, November came in cold and bright, and Dusty Creek settled into its winter rhythm of fewer travelers and longer evenings, and more time spent close to whatever fire was available. Jasper stayed. He made himself useful, which Sadie noted was simply his natural state rather than a performance. He helped Pete Garland, the blacksmith, repair the lintel over the smithy door that had been threatening to come down since September. He fixed the broken step on Cora Lee's back stairs that Sadie had been stepping over for 3 months. He spent several mornings at the land east of town, walking the boundaries and making a rough survey drawing with a precision that impressed her, noting the location of the underground water, the soil composition of the eastern third, the direction of the prevailing wind. He showed her the drawing one evening over coffee. "If the claim is reinstated," he said, spreading the drawing across the bar. "This is where I would put the house. North slope, so the south face catches the sun. The garden here, between the house and the wash, using water from a well sunk at this point." He put his finger on the place he had identified as the location of the underground water table. "The stable could go here east of the house out of the main wind." She looked at the drawing. She looked at his hands, one large and steady on either side of the paper, and then at his face. "You drew this for me," she said. "I drew it because thinking through a problem is how I work," he said. "But yes, for you." She looked back at the drawing. The house was rendered with simple lines but with care, with a porch that faced south and a garden plot with real dimensions. It was not a fantasy. It was a plan. "You are assuming I can manage a property by myself," she said. "Yes," he said. "Because I have seen you manage the Red Lantern, which is considerably more chaotic than 160 acres of scrubland." She laughed, a real laugh, the kind that came out before she had a chance to moderate it, and he looked pleased in a way that was not triumphant but was warm. "I am serious," she said. "So am I," he said. She looked at the drawing for a long moment. "It is a good plan," she said finally. "It is a good piece of land," he said. They were sitting very close together over the drawing, closer than they usually sat, and she was aware of it in a way that was not uncomfortable but was very present, the warmth of him near her, the fact that his shoulder was almost touching hers, the way the lamplight made the angles of his face something she kept wanting to look at and then made herself look away from. "Jasper," she said. "Yes." She turned to look at him, and he was already looking at her, and they were close enough that she could see the fine lines at the corners of his eyes and the particular shade of dark in them. "I have not let myself want things in a long time," she said. "It got expensive." "I know," he said. "I can see that. I do not want to start wanting something and then have it not happen." "I know that too," he held her gaze. "I am not going to promise you things I cannot keep. I am not built that way." He was quiet for a moment. "What I can tell you is that I am here and I intend to keep being here, and that is not nothing." "No," she said softly, "it is not." He reached across the drawing and covered her hand with his, just for a moment, his palm warm and certain over her knuckles, and she turned her hand over and held his, and they stayed like that for what felt like a long time and was probably only 30 seconds, and it was enough. It was more than enough. Cora Lee, at the other end of the bar, moved a glass very loudly and cleared her throat, and did not look at either of them. The land case moved forward through the winter. Callaway filed the challenge to Holt's supplementary claim in early December, and Garland Holt, who was 63 years old and had the disposition of a man who considered the law a personal inconvenience, was furious in the contained, land-owning man way that Sadie had already experienced and knew to take seriously. He came to the Red Lantern on a Thursday in the second week of December, which was unusual because Holt did not drink at saloons. He considered them beneath him, and he stood in the doorway of the Red Lantern in his good coat and looked at Sadie across the room and said, "Miss Brooks, I would like a word." The room, which had been its usual Thursday evening self, went notably quieter. Sadie set down the tray she was carrying. "Mr. Holt," she said, "I understand you have made a filing with respect to land that is mine," he said. "I understand the land in question was mine first," she said. He looked at her for a long moment, and she held the look because she had practice with it. "The clerk made an error. You abandoned the claim." "The attorney does not believe the evidence supports that," she said. "The attorney is a man in Carson City who has never seen this land," Holt said. "He has seen the records," she said, "and the records appear to tell a different story than the one that was convenient for your supplementary filing." Holt's jaw tightened. He was about to say something else when Jasper, who had been at the far end of the bar and had apparently decided this was the appropriate moment, stood up. He did not say anything threatening. He did not move toward Holt. He simply stood up, all 6 feet and some inches of him, and looked at Holt with a calm, assessing expression that communicated without words that he was paying attention and had not yet decided what he thought. Holt looked at him. "Who are you?" "Jasper Wells," Jasper said. "I am a friend of Miss Brooks." A pause. "You are not from here." "No," Jasper agreed, "but I understand land law. And I understand that Thomas Bickler's other decisions from his time in the land office have been reviewed by the territory and found wanting." He looked at Holt steadily. "Mr. Calloway will make that argument formally. I would think about whether a court appearance is worth the trouble over a parcel you have not improved." Holt stood in the doorway for another moment. He was not a stupid man, which in some ways made him more dangerous, because stupid men made easily identifiable mistakes. He looked at Sadie, and then at Jasper, and then at the room in general, which was watching him with the interested attention of people who had been waiting for something and were now getting it. "I will be speaking with my own attorney," he said, and left. The room exhaled. The card game picked up again. One of the Jensen Ranch cowboys tipped his hat at Sadie from across the room, and she nodded back. Jasper came and leaned on the bar. "He will make it difficult," he said quietly. "I know," she said. "He always does." "Calloway knows that too. He factored it in." She looked at him. "You are very calm about this." "I am not calm," he said. "I am controlled. There is a difference." She looked at him carefully. She could see, now that she was paying attention to it, the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands were resting lightly on the bar rather than loosely, the slight tightness around his eyes. "Thank you," she said, "for standing up." "You were doing fine," he said. "I just wanted him to know you were not alone." She felt that land in the exact middle of her chest. She was not alone. The simplicity of it was enormous. Christmas came in quietly, the way it did in small desert towns, with a tree in the window of the general store and Mrs. Pettigrew's famous dried apple cake, and a brief, slightly enthusiastic service at the church that Sadie attended for the first time in 3 years because Cora Lee insisted, and because it turned out Jasper was going. They sat together in the third row, and the preacher talked for considerably longer than anyone had planned for, and Sadie watched Jasper's profile in the candlelight and thought about the drawing he had made of the house, the one with the south-facing porch and the garden between the house and the wash, and she thought about 30 years old and what it contained, and she thought that perhaps the thing she had been accounting for wrong was that life did not follow a ledger. It did not owe her things by a certain date. It moved forward the way the territory moved, with difficulty and surprise and occasional grace, and you either moved with it or you stood still and let it pass you. She was not going to stand still. After the service they walked back down the main street side by side in the cold, clear dark, and he offered his arm and she took it, and they walked like that without speaking for a while. "Merry Christmas, Sadie," he said when they reached the door of the Red Lantern. "Merry Christmas, Jasper," she said. He looked at her for a moment in the lamplight from the saloon window, and then he leaned forward and pressed his mouth gently to her temple, just for a moment, warm and careful, and she closed her eyes briefly and felt the whole night lean in around that moment. He pulled back. His expression was serious and soft at the same time. "I meant what I said," he said, "about not leaving." "I know," she said. "I want to be clear about it," he said. "I am not here because of the land case or because I do not have somewhere else to be. I am here because you are here." She looked at him. She was 30 years old and she had stopped letting herself want things, and now she was standing in the cold December air outside a saloon in a small Nevada town, and the wanting was so present and uncomplicated that it felt almost frightening in its clarity. "I am here," she said. "I am not going anywhere." He smiled then, properly, and she realized it was the first time she had seen him smile with his whole face, and it changed everything about the way he looked in a way that was deeply unfair and entirely arresting. And she laughed at herself for noticing, and he laughed at her laughing, and they stood there on the wooden sidewalk in the cold laughing at nothing in particular, and it was, she thought, the best Christmas she had had in a very long time. January arrived with a cold front that froze the water troughs every morning and kept most of Dusty Creek indoors. Jasper had by this point moved from being a man passing through to something more integrated, and people in town had adjusted to him with the pragmatic acceptance of frontier communities, which was less about warmth than about usefulness. He helped where he was needed. He did not make a fuss. He had a way of showing up when something needed doing without it feeling like an imposition, and Mrs. Pettigrew had started keeping his preferred coffee blend behind the counter, and Mrs. Alvarez had reportedly given him the room at the front of the boarding house with the better light, which she only did for guests she intended to keep. He and Sadie found a rhythm. She worked the evenings at the Red Lantern, and he would come in around 8 and sit at the end of the bar, and they would talk when she had a moment and sit in comfortable silence when she did not. And at closing time, he would walk her to the foot of the stairs and say good night, and she would go up and he would go back to the boarding house, and they were both excruciatingly aware of each other the whole time. Cora Lee, who watched this with the patience of someone who had seen a great many things and knew which ones to wait out and which ones to push, finally said, on a Tuesday in late January, "Sadie Brooks, that man is in love with you." Sadie was drying glasses. "We are getting to know each other." "You have been getting to know each other for 3 months, Cora Lee said, which is approximately 2 months and 3 weeks longer than it took me to know I was going to marry my husband, God rest him." "You married your husband after 1 week. 1 week and 4 days, Cora Lee said. "Granted, he was not entirely what I hoped for in every respect, but the feeling was correct." She took the glass from Sadie's hands. "Go talk to him, not in here. Go somewhere that is not this bar." Sadie looked at her. "You are closing early." "I am telling you to take Sunday off," Cora Lee said, "which I should have done months ago. Take Sunday and take your lantern-jawed cowboy and go do something that is not work." "He is not my cowboy," Sadie said. "Not yet," said Cora Lee, in a tone that suggested the situation would be corrected shortly. Sunday was clear and cold and bright, and Jasper arrived at the back door of the saloon at 9 in the morning with his horse and the borrowed biscuits saddled and ready, which meant Cora Lee had been coordinating, and Sadie put on her good coat and her hat and did not argue. They rode east, the way they had on that first Saturday in October, but this time they rode past the land claim and further out, into the open desert where the scrub gave way to wider sky, and the basin spread out flat and pale and enormous all around them. The cold made everything precise, the edges of things sharp and clear, and the silence was the kind that the desert did best, full and complete, not empty but brimming. They tied the horses near a rocky outcrop that gave some shelter from the wind and sat on the flat stones, and ate the lunch that Mrs. Alvarez had packed because she too appeared to have been coordinated with, biscuits and hard cheese and dried apricots and 2 small pies that were still slightly warm. "This was organized without my knowledge," Sadie said, looking at the pies. "I may have mentioned to Mrs. Alvarez that we were taking a ride," Jasper said, without looking particularly guilty. "And Cora Lee may have mentioned to you that Sunday would be a good day." "She may have written me a note," he said. Sadie looked at him. He was trying not to smile and failing with increasing generosity. She pointed at him. "You are all conspiring." "We are all fond of you," he said, and the simplicity of it stopped her. She looked at him. He was looking back at her, steady and warm and entirely sincere. "Jasper," she said. "Yes." "What do you want to do?" she said, "going forward. When the land case is resolved one way or the other, when you have written everything to your mother, when there is nothing else that needs settling." She held his gaze. "What do you want?" He was quiet for a moment, and she could see him choosing how to say what he had already decided. "I want to stay," he said. "I want to build something here. If the land comes back to you, I want to help you work it. If it does not, I want to help you find another way forward." He paused. "I want to be with you, Sadie. I am not subtle about it, and I have not been for some time, and I would rather say it plainly than let you wonder." She felt the whole desert go still around her. She felt 30 years old and 8 years of working and trying and letting go and starting over, and she felt all of it at once, and it was not painful anymore. It was everything that had brought her to this flat stone in this wide, cold sky, looking at this man who had ridden into the alley behind her saloon and asked her where to find the sheriff's office. "I am not easy," she said. "I have opinions about too many things, and I ask too many questions, and I do not let things go gracefully. "I have noticed all of that," he said. "I find it entirely appealing." She laughed, and then she stopped laughing, and then she said, "I want to stay too. I want this land and this town, and I want you in it." He reached for her hand across the flat stone, and she gave it to him, and he held it in both of his with the same warmth and certainty he had shown that first evening over the survey drawing, and they sat like that in the middle of the wide Nevada basin, while the cold moved around them and the horses stood patient and still, and the sky went on forever in every direction. "All right then," he said softly. "All right then," she said. He leaned toward her and she leaned toward him, and he kissed her properly this time, not on the temple, not careful and brief, but fully and with intention, and the desert and the cold and the enormous quiet held them in it. February brought two things. The first was a letter from R.H. Calloway, delivered on a Tuesday, stating that Garland Holt had withdrawn his objection to the reinstatement of Sadie Brooks's homestead claim after further review of the Bickler filing irregularities. The letter further stated that the claim would be formally reinstated in the name of Sadie Elizabeth Brooks effective February 12, 1883. The land was hers. The second was a letter from Wyoming, from Jasper's mother, which he read in the dining room of Mrs. Alvarez's boarding house, and then brought to Sadie at the saloon that evening with a look on his face that was equal parts grief and something else. She read it. His mother wrote about Daniel, about the grief of it, about the comfort of knowing where he was, and that the men at the camp had tended his grave. And then she wrote in the careful script of a woman who had raised two sons alone after her husband died and had decided opinions about what mattered, that she was glad Jasper had found someone worth staying for, and that she hoped to meet Sadie when the time came, and that she trusted her son's judgment entirely. Sadie set the letter down. "She knows about me. I wrote to her in November," he said. "What did you tell her?" "The truth," he said. "That I had met someone extraordinary in a small Nevada town, and that I intended to see what came of it." Sadie looked at him. She felt something enormous and soft open in her chest that she had been keeping carefully closed for a very long time. "You called me extraordinary in a letter to your mother." "Yes," he said, "because you are." She pressed her lips together and looked at the bar top and took a breath. "The land is mine," she said. "Calloway's letter came today." He stood up from his stool and she came around the end of the bar and they stood facing each other, and then she went into his arms with a directness that surprised both of them, or rather surprised her, and he held her with a certainty that said he had been waiting to be able to do exactly this for quite some time. "It is yours," he said, his mouth against her hair. "It always was." She held onto the lapels of his jacket and pressed her face briefly against his shoulder and felt, for the first time in a long time, that the ground beneath her was solid. Spring came to Dusty Creek and to the land east of town together. They broke ground in April. Jasper knew how to do it properly. The turning of the soil and the reading of the land and the sinking of the well at the point he had identified in January. And he was right, as he had been right about the depth, and the water came in at 18 feet, clean and cold and absolutely certain. And Sadie cried one brief set of tears into her sleeve when it happened, because she had tried to find water on this land 4 years ago and believed there was none. And here it was. It had been here the whole time. They built the house on the north slope with the south-facing porch, the way the drawing had shown. They had help. This surprised Sadie and perhaps should not have, because Dusty Creek was a small town, and small towns in the Nevada Territory of 1883 operated on the logic of mutual aid, where you helped your neighbor build because your neighbor would help you. And even people who barely knew Sadie came out on the 2 Saturdays in May when they framed and raised the walls, because Jasper had spent 5 months being useful in a way that accumulated social credit without being calculated about it. And Cora Lee brought food, and Mrs. Pettigrew organized everything, and even old Earl Dougal, the perpetually sleeping sheriff, appeared briefly and hammered 2 nails with great ceremony before retiring to a chair in the shade. The house was not large. It did not need to be. 2 rooms to start, with the intention of more, and the south porch where the morning sun came in full and bright, and the garden between the house and the new well where Sadie put in her seeds in the second week of May, onions and carrots and beans, and the one extravagant thing, a small patch for flowers because she had decided she was allowed one extravagance. She slept in the house for the first time on a night in late May, while Jasper was still at Mrs. Alvarez's boarding house, because this was Dusty Creek in 1883, and they were not married, and they were both aware of the fact that the town had opinions, and also because sleeping in the house for the first time was something she wanted to do alone, a private ceremony of arrival. She lay on her cot with the window open and the desert night pouring in around her, and the smell of new-cut wood and turned earth, and she said to the dark, quietly, "I am 30 years old and I have a house and a well and a garden and a man who called me extraordinary in a letter to his mother, and if you had told me this in October, I would not have believed you." The dark did not answer, but it felt attentive. Jasper proposed on a Sunday in June, on the south porch, with a plain gold ring that he had ordered from a jeweler in Carson City, which had taken 6 weeks to arrive, and which he had been carrying in his jacket pocket for the final 2 of those weeks with what Cora Lee later described as visible anxiety. He had not made a speech. He had come out to the porch where Sadie was drinking her morning coffee and looking at the garden which was coming in well, and he had sat down beside her and said, "I have been carrying this for 2 weeks, and I believe my patience is fully exhausted," and he put the ring on the porch rail between them. She looked at it. It was simple and good, the way everything he did was simple and good. "Sadie Brooks," he said, "I would very much like to marry you." She looked at him. He was looking at her the same way he always looked at her, with that full and unapologetic attention that she had stopped being able to look away from sometime in November. "Yes," she said. "Obviously yes." He laughed and she laughed, and he put the ring on her finger and it fit perfectly, and she asked him how he had known the size, and he said he had asked Cora Lee, which meant Cora Lee had known about the ring for 2 weeks and had said absolutely nothing, which was a feat of self-control Sadie planned to acknowledge properly. They were married in August of 1883 at the Dusty Creek Church, in a ceremony that was attended by virtually the entire town because everyone had been waiting for it for the better part of a year and considered themselves personally invested. Cora Lee stood at Sadie's side. Mrs. Alvarez, who had become unexpectedly emotional about the whole thing, sat in the front row. Mrs. Pettigrew had made a cake of a size and ambition that suggested she had been planning it since January. Old Earl Dougal, to everyone's surprise, stayed awake through the entire ceremony, which was considered something of a miracle. The preacher said his words and they said theirs, and when Jasper slid the ring fully onto her finger and looked at her with that expression that was serious and warm and entirely focused on her, she thought about the back steps of the red lantern in October, the cracked hand mirror and the dying afternoon light, and all the accounting she had done of herself and found lacking, and she thought that she had been wrong about the ledger. She had been very, very wrong. She was 30 years old. She had crossed the frontier alone at 22 and worked for 8 years in a town that was not always kind, and she had not given up, not entirely, even when she had let herself believe she had, and she had found good people, Cora Lee and Mrs. Pettigrew and Mrs. Alvarez, and the town that had shown up to frame her house, and she had found this man, this careful, honest, steady man who had ridden into an alley and asked a stranger where to find the sheriff's office and had somehow, in the course of 4 days, seen her so completely that she had not been invisible since. That was not nothing. That was everything. The summer after the wedding was the best one Sadie could remember. The garden came in fully, the beans and the carrots and the onions and the flowers, the extravagant patch of flowers, bloomed in colors that seemed excessive and perfect against the pale Nevada scrubland. Jasper had written to Pete Garvey in Wyoming and made arrangements for the ranch there to continue under Pete's management, with a fair agreement that gave Pete a true partnership interest, because Jasper intended to build something here and a fair man divided his assets fairly. He began acquiring cattle in September. A modest start, 12 head of good stock he bought from a rancher who was going back east, and he and Sadie spent 2 weeks building proper fencing on the western edge of the property, with the help of a young man named Caleb Torres, who was 17 and worked half the ranches in the county, and had decided, apparently, that the Wells operation was worth his time. Caleb was quick and good-natured and could string fence wire faster than anyone Sadie had seen, and by the end of the 2 weeks, he had a standing offer of work whenever he wanted it. Sadie kept her mornings for the garden and her afternoons for the books, the accounting of the property, the reading of the cattle market prices in the territorial enterprise that arrived twice a week, the notes she kept on the land's development and the water levels in the well. She was good at it, she discovered, better than she would have guessed. Numbers made sense to her in a way that surprised her, and she had opinions about the cattle market that Jasper listened to with serious attention and sometimes acted on. She did not go back to work at the Red Lantern, but she and Cora Lee remained close, in the way of women who have been in each other's orbits long enough that the connection is structural rather than circumstantial. Cora Lee came to dinner on Sundays, and Sadie brought her eggs from the 3 hens she had acquired, and they sat on the south porch and talked in the way women who trust each other talk, about everything and nothing and the specific texture of living in the territory. "You are happy," Cora Lee said one Sunday, not as a question. "Yes," Sadie said. "Good." Cora Lee sipped her coffee. "I take some credit." "You should," Sadie said. "You take exactly as much credit as sending a man away from a bar on a dark night to find the sheriff's office deserves." "I also told him Sunday was a good day," Cora Lee pointed out. "That too," Sadie agreed. They sat in the afternoon sun and listened to the sound of Jasper moving around the stable, talking to the horses the way he did, in the low, steady voice that was his natural register, and the desert was warm and bright around them, and everything was where it was supposed to be. In November, a year after Jasper had first walked into the Red Lantern, Sadie told him she was expecting a child. She told him in the evening in the kitchen with the lamp burning and the smell of wood smoke from the stove, and she watched his face go through the same compressed series of things she had watched it go through at the assay office counter. But these were entirely different things, and they arrived at an expression that was so open and transparent that it almost undid her. He said, "A child." "In the spring," she said. "Late March or April, I think." He stood up from the table and came around to her and held her, both arms around her, solid and warm, and she pressed her face against his shoulder the way she had in the Red Lantern on the February night when the land came back to her, and she felt him take a long breath and let it out slowly. "A child," he said again into her hair. "We are going to need a bigger house," she said against his shoulder. He laughed, the sound of it moving through both of them. "Yes," he said, "we are." He wrote to his mother in Wyoming that week. His mother wrote back with a length and enthusiasm that suggested she had been waiting for this news specifically for some time, and indicated her intention to come to Nevada in the spring to be present for the birth, which made Sadie feel both grateful and slightly terrified, and then mostly grateful. The winter of 1883 into 1884 was cold and clear, and the house, which they expanded through February with a new room added to the east side, was warm. Jasper's mother, Evangeline Wells, arrived in March on the stage from Carson City, a woman of 60 who was shorter than Sadie had expected and sharper-eyed than she had prepared herself for, and who looked at Sadie for a long moment on the porch and then said, "He described you accurately. I was concerned he might be exaggerating, but he was not." "What did he say?" Sadie asked. Evangeline looked at her son, who had gone slightly careful in the way people did when their mothers arrived. "He said you were the most sensible and the most surprising person he had ever met," she said, "and that the combination was very rare." Sadie looked at Jasper. He shrugged, and the tips of his ears were slightly pink. "Come inside," Sadie said to Evangeline. "I have coffee." Evangeline stayed for 6 weeks, and in that time she taught Sadie 3 things about cattle management that Sadie had not known: reorganized the kitchen with an efficiency that was initially startling and then entirely appreciated, and proved herself to be the kind of woman who had raised her sons to be honest and capable, and who was genuinely proud of both accomplishments. The child was born on the 24th of April, 1884, in the bedroom of the house on the land that had been Sadie's since April of 1878, with Evangeline at the left, and Cora Lee at the right and Jasper in the kitchen, because Cora Lee had firmly relocated him there, and told him to make coffee, which he did with increasing anxiety over the course of several hours. It was a boy. He was, in Sadie's opinion, the most remarkable thing she had ever seen, which was a completely unreasonable and entirely unavoidable conclusion. She heard Jasper's step in the hall and looked up, and Cora Lee opened the door and let him in, and he came and stood at the side of the bed and looked at his son with an expression that was beyond anything she had category for, and then he looked at her. "Daniel," she said, "if you want." He went still. He looked at her and then at the boy and then at her again. "You would want that," he said. "I would," she said. He was a person who wanted to do something large. That seems like a good inheritance. Jasper sat on the edge of the bed and took his son carefully, with the precision of someone who understood what he was holding, and held him with one arm and put his other arm around Sadie, and she leaned against his shoulder in the afternoon light with the Nevada spring outside the window and her garden coming up below and everything in its place. "Daniel Wells," Jasper said softly. "Daniel Wells," Sadie agreed. Evangeline, from the corner, made a sound that she covered with a great deal of efficiency, and Cora Lee pretended to be very interested in something outside the window. Evangeline went home to Wyoming in May, with promises to return that everyone knew she would keep. She took with her a long letter from Jasper about Daniel, about the grave, about the men who had tended it, about the spring morning he had stood at the fence and said what needed saying, and Sadie had added a paragraph of her own, something she had wanted to say to this woman she had only known for 6 weeks, but felt she had understood from the first evening. She had written, "Your son is the most careful and honest man I have ever known, and I believe that comes from you, and I want you to know that I understand what you gave the world when you raised him, and I am grateful for it every day." Evangeline had read it at the kitchen table the morning she was leaving and had said nothing, but she had held Sadie's face in both hands for a moment and looked at her with those sharp eyes that saw things accurately, and then she had said, "Come to Wyoming in the fall," and Sadie had said, "We will," and that was that. The summer of 1884 was full. Caleb Torres, who was 18 now and had decided the Wells Ranch was where he intended to build his career, was there most days, and they expanded the herd to 30 cattle and added a second well on the southern edge of the property and broke new garden ground between the house and the eastern fence line. Sadie's flower patch had tripled in size, which was partly intentional and partly what happened when you gave flowers good soil and water and let them do what they wanted. Jasper had moments when he would stop in the middle of whatever he was doing and look at the land the way he had looked at it that first Saturday in October when he was reading it. And she understood now what he was doing, not reading what the land was, but reading what it was becoming, which was a different and more interesting question. She caught him doing it one evening in August, standing at the fence with his hands resting on the top rail and his face turned toward the west where the sun was going down in its extravagant Nevada way, all orange and red and impossible. She came and stood beside him and rested her arms on the fence. "What are you thinking?" she asked. "I am thinking," he said slowly, "that this is the best piece of land I have ever worked. Better than Wyoming. Better than Wyoming," he said. "The soil in Wyoming is easier, but the story here is better." She looked at the land, at the garden she could see in the near distance, at the house with the south porch, at the stable where the horses moved in their stalls, at the wide sky going orange above all of it. "The story is better," she agreed. He put his arm around her and she leaned into him, and they watched the sun go down over the Nevada basin. And behind them in the house she could hear Daniel, 4 months old and entirely opinionated about the world, making his views known to no one in particular, and it was the best sound she had ever heard in her life. 2 years passed in the way good years do, with enough to mark them but not so much that they became exhausting. Daniel grew into a boy who wanted to know the name of everything, every plant and stone and animal, with the particular seriousness of a very small person who has decided the world is interesting and intends to understand it. He had Jasper's eyes and Sadie's stubbornness, and a laugh that was entirely his own. The herd grew to 60, and then to 80. Sadie's garden had evolved into something genuinely productive, supplying the household, and by the spring of 1886, a small but reliable income from vegetables sold to Mrs. Pettigrew's store and eggs sold to the Red Lantern and 2 other households in town. She had also discovered, with some surprise, that she had a facility for accounting that extended beyond her own household, and she had quietly taken on the books for 3 other operations in Dusty Creek, including the Red Lantern itself, which Cora Lee managed with great intuition and limited patience for numbers. Cora Lee paid her in cash and in the particular currency of a woman who had decided Sadie was family, which meant she had opinions about everything and delivered them generously and meant every word as care. "You should teach," Cora Lee said one Sunday on the porch, apropos of nothing. Sadie looked up from the beans she was shelling. "Teach what?" "Accounting, reading, the general store bookkeeping. There are 4 women in this town who have businesses and cannot keep their own books and are paying men to do it who are not doing it correctly." Cora Lee was firm in the way she always was when she had thought something through. "You have the knowledge. You should use it." Sadie thought about it for 3 days and then wrote a notice for the Territorial Enterprise, which had recently begun running a column on local services and businesses, and offered bookkeeping instruction for women with commercial enterprises, 2 mornings a week, at the Wells Ranch. 4 women wrote back within the week, which was more than she had expected, and she began the next Monday. By the end of 1886, she had 8 regular students and had expanded to 3 mornings a week, and Mrs. Pettigrew had organized a lending library of the accounting texts and land law guides that Sadie owned, because she had pointed out that the knowledge was useful and should be shared, and Sadie had agreed. "You are building something," Jasper said one evening. He said it with a quality of noticing that she recognized and had come to understand was his way of paying attention to what mattered. "I suppose I am," she said. "You sound surprised." She thought about it. "I suppose I always believed building things was slow and that I was bad at patience," she said. "But it turns out that if you are interested enough in a thing you do not notice the patience required." He looked at her. "That is exactly right," he said. "That is exactly what ranching taught me." She laughed. "Are you comparing me to ranching?" "I am comparing what you build," he said, "which is something worth respecting in any context." She threw a dishcloth at him and he caught it and was smiling. And Daniel, who was 2½ and could run now, ran through the kitchen at that moment in pursuit of a ball that had escaped him, and the whole scene was so ordinary and so exactly right that she felt it settle into her the way the best things did, quietly and without ceremony, into the permanent record. In March of 1887 she told him she was expecting again. This time he was not in the kitchen. He was on the south porch, watching the early morning light come across the garden, and she came out with 2 cups of coffee and sat beside him and handed him his cup and said, "I am going to need your help with the accounting books from June onward. I will not be as quick on my feet." He looked at her. "Again?" "In September," she said. He took the cup from her and set both cups down on the porch rail and turned to face her and held both her hands in his and looked at her with the expression she had catalogued over the past 4 years, all the variations of it, and this one was the same open, transparent thing it had been the first time, but with more depth now, more layers of everything they had lived in the years between. "September," he said. "Yes. Daniel will have a sibling. Daniel will have an opinion about it," she said. "He already has opinions about everything." He laughed and pressed her hands to his mouth and kissed them and looked at her over them. "You are extraordinary," he said. She shook her head, smiling. You keep saying that, because it keeps being true, he said, and because you spent years not believing it, so I intend to say it regularly until you believe it fully. She looked at him. She thought about October of 1882, about the cracked hand mirror and the dying light and the $23 and the mended dress and the quiet accounting of a life she had believed was inadequate. She thought about the back steps and the alley and a man asking about the sheriff's office, and the bar and the coffee and the survey maps and the land, her land, this land, the south porch and the garden and the boy asleep inside, and the morning light crossing all of it. I believe it, she said softly. I believe it. He let go of her hands and put his arm around her, and she leaned against his shoulder, and they sat on the south porch in the early Nevada spring with the land around them full and green from the winter rains, and the horses making their morning sounds in the stable, and somewhere inside the house, Daniel making his morning sounds about a ball or a boot, or the specific injustice of being 3 years old, and the coffee cooling in the cups on the rail, and everything in the world in its right place. The second child was a girl born on the 12th of September, 1887, in the same bedroom of the same house, and Sadie named her Evangeline, after the woman who had stood at her left side and told her she had been described accurately, and Jasper looked at his daughter for the first time with the same undone expression, and held her carefully and said, very quietly, "My mother is going to cry for a week." And she did, when the letter arrived in Wyoming, and she wrote back a letter that was 3 pages long, and ended with the information that she intended to spend the following summer in Nevada, which she did. Caleb Torres, who was 22 by then and had been working the Wells Ranch for 4 years, had begun stepping out with Mrs. Alvarez's niece, Rosa, who had come to Dusty Creek in the spring to help at the boarding house and had, by summer, decided to stay. They were married in November of 1887, 2 months after Evangeline was born, and Sadie and Jasper attended the wedding with both children, Daniel very serious in his good shirt and Evangeline carried in Sadie's arms and entirely unconcerned with the proceedings. Dusty Creek was not the same town it had been in 1882. It was larger, for one, the discovery of silver in the hills 12 miles to the north having brought enough new population to warrant a second general store and a proper school, which the town built in the spring of 1886. It had a telegraph that worked reliably now. It had a hotel where the old boarding house had stood, because Mrs. Alvarez had expanded twice, and then sold and retired to a small house on the edge of town where she grew peppers and had definite opinions about everything, and a new sheriff who was awake during his working hours, which was an improvement. Garland Holt, who was 68 and had spent the better part of 3 years trying to buy or litigate his way back to the parcel he had lost, had finally given it up in the fall of 1885 and concerned himself with his other considerable holdings, and the specific hostility he had directed at Sadie had faded to a cold formality that Sadie found entirely acceptable. She had seen men like him in her life and would likely see more, and she had learned that the best response to that kind of opposition was to keep building, because it was very difficult to argue with a house and a garden and a thriving herd and a porch full of people on a Sunday afternoon. By 1888, Sadie Wells, who had been Sadie Brooks when she sat on those back steps with a cracked hand mirror in October of 1882, was 35 years old. She had 160 acres of Nevada land, properly watered and managed and producing. She had a husband who called her extraordinary so regularly that she had, as promised, come to believe it. She had 2 children, a boy who wanted to know the name of everything, and a daughter who appeared to have decided that the world was fundamentally interesting and intended to investigate all of it. She had 8 women who came to her 3 mornings a week to learn their numbers and their books and their legal rights with respect to land and commerce, which was something that had started as a practical matter and had become, she realized, something closer to a purpose. She had Cora Lee, who came on Sundays and said exactly what she thought about everything and meant it all as love. She had Mrs. Pettigrew, who kept her coffee blend and told her when the new books arrived, and had organized 2 lending libraries in 10 years and was working on a third. She had Mrs. Alvarez, who brought peppers and had strong opinions, and who had told Sadie 3 years ago that she was the best thing that had happened to Dusty Creek since the well in the town square, which was high praise from a woman of her standards. She had Evangeline Wells Sr., who wrote long letters from Wyoming and came in the summers, and had taken to calling Sadie her daughter with a complete lack of ceremony that undid Sadie every single time. And she had Jasper, who was at this particular moment standing in the garden with Daniel at his side. The two of them crouched over something in the bean rows, Daniel pointing and asking a question and Jasper answering with the patient accuracy of a man who took every question seriously, because he had decided that every question deserved to be taken seriously. Sadie stood on the south porch with Evangeline on her hip and watched them. She was 35 years old and she had everything to show for it. All of it, every piece, and it had not looked the way she thought it would look when she was 22 and crossing the frontier with 1 bag and $20 and the particular stubborn hope of someone who has nothing left to lose. It had looked like an alley in October and a cup of coffee at the end of a bar and a cracked hand mirror, and a man who read government survey maps for pleasure, and who had stood in the morning light on a flat rock and listed, without being asked, every small and significant thing he had noticed about her, and who had looked at her with the kind of attention that did not reduce but expanded, and had said, with complete simplicity, "I disagree." Jasper looked up from the garden and saw her on the porch and straightened and lifted one hand, a small casual wave, entirely ordinary, entirely certain, and she felt it in her chest the way she had felt it every time, not diminished by repetition but deepened by it. She lifted her hand back. Daniel looked up too and waved both arms in the extravagant manner of a 4-year-old who considered everything an occasion, and Evangeline, seeing her brother waved one small fist into the air from Sadie's hip with the determined enthusiasm of a child who was 8 months old and had already decided she did not intend to miss anything. Sadie laughed. The Nevada sun came down over the land that was hers, over the house with the south porch and the garden in full summer, and the well that had water in it all year, and the stable with the good horses, and the herd on the eastern pasture, and the wide pale sky going on forever in every direction, and the town in the near distance that had a school in it now, and a telegraph, and a lending library that she had had a hand in, and 2 children on this porch and in this garden who would grow up knowing that land could be yours and knowledge could be shared, and that a person with the right kind of attention could see you fully and find what they saw worth staying for. She was not nothing. She had never been nothing. She had just needed someone to stand in an alley and say it plainly, and he had, and he did, and she believed him.